hence one cannot the realm of pure devotional service. Next, Rupa Goswami states that devotional service is transcendental to all material considerations and that is not limited to any particular country, class, society, or circumstances. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is a transcendental and has no cause. Devotional service is executed without any hope for gain, and it cannot be checked by any material circumstances. It is open for all without any distinction, and it is the constitutional occupation of the living entities. In the Middle Ages, after the disappearance of Lord Chaitanya's great associates, Lord Nityananda, a class of priestly persons claimed to be the descendants of Nityananda, calling themselves the Goswami caste. They further claimed that the practice and spreading of devotional service belonged only to their particular class, which was known as Nityananda Vamsa. In this way, they exercised their artificial power for some time until Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura, the powerful Acharya of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, completely smashed their idea. There was a great hard struggle for some time, but it has turned out successfully, and it is now correctly and practically established that devotional service is not restricted to a particular class of men. Besides that, anyone who is engaged in devotional service is already at the status of being a high-class Brahmana. So, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura struggles for this movement has come out successful. It is on the basis of his position that anyone can now become a Gaudiya Vaishnava from any part of the world or any part of the universe. Anyone who is a pure Vaishnava is situated transcendently, and therefore the highest qualification in the material world, namely to be in the mode of goodness, has already been achieved by such a person. Our Krishna consciousness movement in the Western world is based on the above mentioned proposition of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, our spiritual master. On his authority, we are claiming members from all sections of the Western countries. The so-called Brahmanas claim that one who is not born into a Brahmana family cannot receive the sacred thread and cannot become a high-grade Vaishnava. But we do not accept such a theory because it is not supported by Rupa Goswami nor by the strength of the various scriptures. Hare Krishna.
So here, the purity of devotional service. So here Srila Rupa Goswami is describing how how devotional service is so pure and potent that anyone from any part of the world, from any walk of life, any age, color, creed, caste, doesn't matter. Anyone can take to the practice of pure devotional service. That is the purity of pure devotional service. It does not depend on any material consideration, and there cannot be any material impediment to the practice of devotional service. And that's what the Srimad Bhagavatam describes. Ahaituki apratihata. Apratihata means there cannot be any material interruption to the practice of devotional service. And so therefore, even though certain section of the people were claiming that they have a monopoly over devotional service, like members of the Nityananda Vamsha or those born in Brahmana families. So such categories of people were claiming that only they can practice devotional service. But Rupa Goswami here is establishing very clearly that anyone from any part of the world can practice devotional service, because that is the purity of devotional service, which depends on the mercy of the Supreme Lord. And so therefore, on this proposition of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada has preached throughout the world. And now we are seeing that how people from practically every country, every continent, every religion of the world are accepting Krishna consciousness. So this is the purity of devotional service. Rupa Goswami is giving a few examples to establish this in the next paragraph. Like some examples from the Padma Puran and Skanda Puran. So those examples you can read. So then you can go to the next paragraph. Thus a Vaishnav.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, continue, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thus,
Hare.
a Vaishnava automatically becomes a Brahmana. This idea is also supported by Sanatan Goswami in his book Hari Bhakta Vilas, which is the Vaishnava Guide. Therein, he has clearly stated that any person who is properly initiated into the Vaishnava cult certainly becomes a Brahmana. As much as the metal known as Kamsa, bell metal, is turned into gold by the mixture of mercury, a bona fide spiritual master, under the guidance of authorities, can turn anyone to the Vaishnava cult, so that naturally he may come to the topmost position of a Brahmana.
Yes, one more time.
Srila Rupa Goswami warns, however, that if a person is properly initiated by a bona fide spiritual master, he should not think that simply by the acceptance of such initiation, his business is then finished. One still has to follow the rules and regulations very carefully. If after accepting the spiritual master and being initiated, one does not follow the rules and regulations of devotional service, then he is again followed. One must be very vigilant to remember that he is the part and parcel of the transcendental body of Krishna, and that it is his duty as part and parcel to give service to the whole, or Krishna. If we do not render service to Krishna, then again we fall down. In other words, simply becoming initiated does not elevate one to the position of a high-class Brahmana. One also has to discharge the duties and follow the regulative principles very rigidly.
Okay. So here, Srila Rupa Goswami is explaining that how anyone can become a Vaishnava by following the process, Diksha Vidhena, by the process of Diksha Vidhanina, Diksha Vidhan. So here, he's quoting from the Hari Bhakti Vilas, where Sanatana Goswami is giving the example of how bell metal by the mixture of mercury can be turned into gold. So why he's giving this example is because if anyone follows that process, then anyone can make gold. It does not matter whether the person is Indian, American, European, Hindu, Muslim, whatever. If somebody knows that process of turning bell metal into gold, he can do it. It just depends on following the process properly. Srila Prabhupada says, unfortunately, nobody knows the process now. So therefore, nobody can make gold. Otherwise, many people would have made gold now. But unfortunately, they don't know. So, but the point is that anyone who follows the process, yes, he can turn bell metal into gold. It doesn't matter who, where, when. So similarly, anyone from any part of the world can become a Vaishnava simply by following the process. And the process is to accept Diksha from a bona fide spiritual master and follow his instructions. That's the process. So one follows the process, anyone from any part of the world can become a Vaishnava. So that's how devotional service is universally applicable and anyone can become a Vaishnava. Okay, so now Rupa Goswami is giving a warning. Okay, anyone can become a Vaishnava by accepting Diksha from a bona fide spiritual master. But the warning is that the business does not finish by initiation. So Srila Prabhupada is writing here, he should not think that simply by the acceptance of such initiation, his business is then finished. One still has to follow the rules and regulations very carefully. So sometimes devotees are also under the misconception that once Diksha is finished means everything is finished. And now ticket back to God, it is booked. Okay, maybe it is booked, but a date has not yet been put. So nobody knows when. So the point is that initiation means what? Beginning. It's not completion or it's not perfection. Initiation means beginning. Everywhere we find that usually devotees are very enthusiastic about initiation, getting initiated. We find devotees becoming super enthusiastic just before initiation, few days before initiation, or few days before names are being given for initiation. Then we find all of a sudden the devotee becomes super enthusiastic. Every day in Mangalarti, everything is there. But then once initiation is finished, then some people just disappear. So therefore, Rupa Goswami is giving a warning that initiation is not the end, initiation is the beginning. And after initiation, one has to follow the rules and regulations very carefully. So as we have already discussed in our previous discussions, that at the time of initiation, one receives the Bhakti Lata Bij from the spiritual master. What is the meaning of Bhakti Lata Bij? We saw a definition which Srila Prabhupada gives. Somebody remembers? What is the definition of Bhakti Lata Bij? We repeat it at least 2-3 times.
Seed of devotion, Prabhu.
What is that?
Seed of devotion.
That's the translation. What's the definition?
Being faithful to the spiritual master.
What's that?
Being faithful to the spiritual master. Satisfying the spiritual master.
The causeless mercy of the spiritual master.
No. We want a precise definition of Bhakti Lata Bij. It's a request that devotees can revise what has been taught. Otherwise, we go ahead, what has been taught is forgotten in 2 days only. Then what will happen after the course is finished? So please remember, methods, rules, and regulations by which one is trained in devotional service constitute Bhakti Lata Bij. Methods, rules, and regulations by which one is trained in devotional service constitute Bhakti Lata Bij. So this is what one receives at the time of initiation. One is basically accepting instructions from the spiritual master, taking vows to follow those instructions. That is what one is receiving at the time of initiation. So if one is not following those rules and regulations, then actually the initiation has no meaning. In one initiation lecture, Srila Prabhupada is saying that after initiation, if you don't follow my instructions, you don't follow the rules and regulations, then I cannot protect you. Srila Prabhupada says this. Because the mercy of the spiritual master essentially flows through his instructions. So when one follows the instructions of the spiritual master, that's how one receives the mercy. Srila Prabhupada also gives the example that just like when one has fallen into a well, somebody throws a rope into the well, but the person within the well at least has to catch hold of the rope. Then the person can pull him out. But if the person within the well says, no, you only pull me out somehow. No, at least you have to catch hold of the rope. So the spiritual master is giving instructions, but ultimately the disciple has to follow. That is his part. Nobody else can do it for him. So if the disciple does not follow the instructions of the spiritual master, even the spiritual master cannot help. Nobody can help. Because that is something which every individual disciple has to do. So if the disciple fails to follow the instructions, then nobody in the world can help. So therefore, initiation is just the beginning. Then one has to follow the instructions very seriously. So in one purport in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 5th canto, in Bharat Maharaj's pastime, Srila Prabhupada writes, if one strictly follows the instructions of the spiritual master, then there is no question of fall down. And here also Srila Prabhupada writes the same thing. One has to follow the rules and regulations very carefully. If after accepting the spiritual master and being initiated, one does not follow the rules and regulations of devotional service, then he is again fallen. So therefore, this is very, very important. And after initiation, if one does not follow the rules and regulations, then what is the result? Then sometimes the spiritual master may have to suffer. Please read this from the slide.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Rupa Goswami states that
are the slides changing or no?
No, it is not changed.
No, Prabhuji.
Oh, somebody should have told, no? Okay. Now?
Yes. Sometimes, is that Prabhuji? Sometimes
Yes.
Sometimes the spiritual master, after accepting a disciple, must take charge of that disciple's past sinful activities and, being overloaded, must sometimes suffer, if not fully, then partially, for the sinful acts of the disciple. Every disciple, therefore, must be very careful not to commit sinful activities after initiation. The poor spiritual master is kind and merciful enough to accept a disciple and partially suffer for that disciple's sinful activities. But Krishna, being merciful to his servant, neutralizes the reactions of sinful deeds for the servant who engages in preaching his glories. Hare Krishna.
Yes, so if the disciple does not follow the rules and regulations, perform sinful activities, then the spiritual master may have to suffer for the sinful acts of the disciple. Of course, Krishna can neutralize the sinful reactions, but sometimes Krishna may also give some indication to both the spiritual master and the disciples that they need to be careful. Srila Prabhupada did mention that towards his final pastimes, when he became very sick, he said, the reason is because my disciples are not following the principles, following the rules and regulations. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada in his lectures, he describes that sometimes the Christians say that Jesus will suffer for our sins. So Srila Prabhupada says, what nonsense is this? So what, you have a contract with Jesus. You keep on sinning and he suffers for your sins. This is absolute nonsense. First of all, he is saving you and then you're making him suffer more. What sense does this make? So similarly, the spiritual master is saving the disciple from material existence. And then rather than being grateful, if one wants to make the spiritual master suffer, then that's the height of ingratitude. So therefore, the disciples must be very careful to properly follow all the rules and regulations. Sometimes disciples take these things very lightly, and sometimes we do find disciples not following rules and regulations, not chanting 16 rounds daily. So we find all these things happening. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada, in one lecture, at the end of one lecture, somebody is asking Srila Prabhupada the question that what if a disciple is unable to follow the rules and regulations after initiation? Srila Prabhupada's spontaneous response was, then he is an animal. Only an animal does not have determination. So Srila Prabhupada goes on to say that if after having taken vows before the spiritual master, before the Supreme Lord, before the fire, before the Vaishnavas, one takes vows of initiation, then who's the gentleman who takes vows and then does not follow? So Srila Prabhupada says, if one is not confident about following, then one should not accept initiation. Don't make it a farce. Prabhupada says this. Don't make it a farce. That means don't make it simply a show. Prabhupada very often said that also. Accepting the spiritual master is not a matter of fashion, just like one keeps a dog. So it's not just a matter of fashion or a status symbol. Oh, now I'm also initiated. I have an initiated name. It's not simply a fashion. It is a very serious business. So therefore, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says that only one who is very serious to totally give up material sense gratification must accept a bona fide spiritual master. So it's a very serious business, not simply some fashion or a status symbol. So one has to be extremely serious about following the rules and regulations, getting out of material existence, going back home, back to Godhead. So one has to be very serious about all these things. Then only one should accept initiation. Okay, read this.
The life of a sincere devotee of the Lord is thus explained in a nutshell by Narada Muni by his personal example. Such a devotee, after his initiation by the Lord or his bona fide representative, takes very seriously chanting of the glories of the Lord and traveling all over the world, so that others may also hear the glories of the Lord. Their only business is to chant and remember the holy name, fame, and pastimes of the Lord, and according to personal capacity, to distribute the message for others' welfare without motive of material gain. Hare Krishna.
Yes. So here Srila Prabhupada is explaining that how one actually becomes more serious after initiation. So after initiation, one takes very seriously the chanting of the glories of the Lord. Can everyone hear?
Prabhuji.
Prabhu, can hear Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
Audio is
Okay.
very clear.
Okay, fine. There was a power cut here. So, here, as it mentions that Narad Muni, after initiation, he took it more seriously, the chanting of the glories of the Lord and preaching. So the point is that after initiation, one is actually supposed to become more serious. Not that after initiation, one becomes less serious, one becomes lax, and one stops following. No, rather, after initiation, one is supposed to become more serious. Okay, read this.
If one lives only for the satisfaction of Krishna, it does not matter whether he belongs to this order of life or that order of life. One's only business should be to satisfy Krishna. This process is completely manifest in the activities of Krishna consciousness movement. It has been actually proved that the entire world can accept devotional service without failure. One simply has to follow the instructions of the representative of Krishna.
Yes, so the entire world can accept devotional service. So everyone is qualified to accept devotional service, but one simply has to follow the instructions of the representative of Krishna. Now, the next point Rupa Goswami says is that, okay, yes, one definitely has to be very careful to follow the rules and regulations and avoid sinful activities after initiation. But accidentally, because we are in the material world, due to the power of the material energy, sometimes one may accidentally commit some sinful activities. Then what is the prayashchitta? What is the atonement? So please read the next paragraph from the book.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam.
Yes.
Srila Rupa Goswami also says that if one is regularly discharging devotional service, there will be no question of fall down. But even if circumstantially there is some fall down, the Vaishnava need have nothing to do with the prayashchitta, the ritualistic ceremony for purification. If someone falls down for the principles of devotional service, he need not take the prayashchitta performances for reformation. He simply has to execute the rules and regulation for discharging devotional service, and this is sufficient for his reinstatement. This is the mystery of Vaishnava devotional cult.
Yes. So even if one performs some sinful activities, then he does not have to perform some other prayashchitta performances, like in Karmakand. So in Karmakand, there may be different prayashchitta activities. Okay, you're committed to this sinful activity, then go to this devata, do some puja, do some yajna, do some tapasya. So all these things may be there in Karmakand. But on the path of devotional service, because devotional service itself is purifying, in fact, is the most purifying. So therefore, there is no need to do something separate. One just has to continue his devotional service, or he may intensify his devotional service as a prayashchitta. There is no need to perform any other activities besides the activities of devotional service as prayashchitta. Okay, so that's the important point. And that is, of course, also corroborated by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, when he says, Api ched suduracharo bhajate imam ananyabha sadhureva samantavya samyak vyavasitavisa Shipram bhavati dharmatma shashva shanti nigachati kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. So these two verses are explaining that even if one accidentally performs some sinful activity, but if he continues on, bhajate imam ananya bhak, if he continues on in the practice of devotional service, then Krishna, who's there as the Paramatma within the heart of the devotee, purifies the devotee of the contamination and reinstates him in his proper position. So therefore, on the path of devotional service, there is no separate processes of atonement, but the practice of devotional service in themselves are prayashchitta. So that is the purity of devotional service. So because devotional service is very pure, so therefore devotional service itself purifies the devotee of any contamination. There is no need of performing some other separate activity for purification. Okay, so now Rupa Goswami describes that how pure devotional service is the topmost amongst all the various transcendental processes of karma, jnana, yoga, and bhakti. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada writes, practically the three processes for elevating one to the platform of spiritual consciousness. These processes are called karma, jnana, and bhakti. And then he is describing about each of these processes. And then, in order to establish that bhakti is the best, Srila Rupa Goswami is giving certain quotes. So there are three quotes to establish the superiority of bhakti over all other processes. So the first quote is from the 11th canto, 21st chapter, verse 2. Lord Krishna says to Uddhav, the distinction between qualification and disqualification are made in this way. Persons who are already elevated in discharging devotional service will never again take shelter of the process of fruitive activity or philosophical speculation. If one sticks to devotional service and is conducted by regulative principles given by the authorities and acharyas, that is the best qualification. Okay, so one who has come to the path of devotional service will never think of going back to any other processes of karma or jnana, because he knows that that is the best. And then he's quoting from the first canto, 5th chapter, verse 17. Narad Muni advises Vyasadeva, even if one does not execute a specific occupational duty, but immediately takes direct shelter of the lotus feet of Hari, there will be no fault on his part, and in all circumstances his position is secure. Even if by some bad association he falls down while executing devotional service, or if he does not finish the complete course of devotional service and dies untimely, still he is not at a loss. A person who is simply discharging his occupational duty in one ashram, however, with no Krishna consciousness, practically does not gain the true benefit of human life. Okay, so this is the famous verse, Tyaktva swadharmam charanam bhujam hare bhajan apakot tapate tato yadi Tyaktva kuvad bhrada abadhram abhut amushakim kovarta apto bhajatam swadharmataha. So here Narad Muni is saying that Tyaktva swadharma, even if one gives up one's swadharma means varnashram duties. Even if one gives up one's varnashram duties, but one takes to the lotus feet, one takes shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, Charnam Bhujam Hare. So then, bhajan apakko tapate tato yadi, even if such a person falls down, there is no loss. But if somebody is properly following varnashram duties, but he does not perform devotional service, what is the gain? He simply has to remain in the material world. So therefore, this is the glory of bhakti. This is the purity of devotional service, that there is no loss on the part of someone who takes to the path of devotional service. And as the Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, verse number 40 is saying, the famous verse, what is that? What is 2nd chapter, verse number 40?
Neha Vikramanashosti.
Yes, Neha Vikramanashosti Prativayinodite. Swalpam Piyasa Dharmasya Trayita Mahatubhaya. So whatever little devotional service one has performed in this life, that continues in the next life, there is never any loss. So that is the glory of devotional service. Now, and so then there are one or two more quotes that Srila Prabhupada is saying. And therefore, at the end of the next paragraph, Prabhupada writes, from Srimad Bhagavatam and the authentic Vedic scriptures, we learn further that if a person simply acts in Krishna consciousness and discharges devotional service, he is considered to be far, far better situated than all of those persons engaged in philanthropic, ethical, moral, altruistic, and social welfare activities. Okay, so people may be performing so many of these activities, but because they're all on the material bodily platform, they are all inferior to the practices of pure devotional service, which are on the spiritual platform and have eternal benefit. Okay. Now, another point that Srila Rupa Goswami is mentioning to establish the purity of devotional service is that how one who takes to the path of devotional service does not have debts to anyone. And so in that context, he's quoting from the Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto, 5th chapter, verse 41, in which Karabhajan Muni addresses Maharaj Nimi. So this is the famous verse, Devarshi Bhutaptaninam Pitrinam Na Kinkaro Nayam Rini Charajan Sarvatmanaya Sharanam Sharanyam Gato Mukundam Parirutta Kartam. Prabhupada is given the translation for that. My dear king, if someone gives up his occupational duties as they prescribe for the different varnas and ashrams, but takes complete shelter, surrendering himself under the lotus feet of the Lord, such a person is no more a debtor, nor has he any obligation to perform the different kinds of activities we render to the great sages, ancestors, living entities, family, society members, nor has he any need to bother executing the 5 kinds of yajnas, sacrifices for becoming free from sinful contamination. Simply by discharging devotional service, he is freed from all kinds of obligations. So Srila Prabhupada is explaining here that how, as soon as one takes birth in this world, one becomes a debtor to so many people of this world. One becomes a debtor to devas, the demigods, because demigods are supplying us food, water, air, everything they're supplying, rain. So therefore we become a debtor to the devatas. So Deva, Rishi, one becomes a debtor to the rishis because one is getting so much spiritual knowledge from the saintly persons. Bhuta means other living entities. So one is indebted to so many other living entities. Prabhupada is giving the example of the cow. So mother cow is giving us the most precious, nutritious food, wholesome food, complete food, Srila Prabhupada said, in the form of milk. And so we're indebted. We're indebted to the cow. We're indebted to the honeybees from whom we get honey. So we're indebted to so many living entities. Bhuta, Apta means relatives. So we're indebted to them because they're helping us in so many different ways. Ninam means other human beings in society. We are living in a society. We're dependent on the other human beings for so many resources, so much help in society. So Devarshi, Bhuta, Apta, Ninam, Pitrinam. So we are indebted to the forefathers. So we have taken birth in this world only because of the forefathers. So in this way, one becomes indebted to so many people in this world when one is born. And there are how many devatas? 33 crore devatas. So how one can give the debts to all these people? How is it possible? So therefore, it is only possible by the one-stroke method of devotional service, Krishna consciousness. So if one surrenders to Krishna, then one pays off all these debts. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada is quoting from the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayasya. So Krishna says, just surrender unto me. If you think there is any sinful activity by giving up the service to so many other people, don't worry, I will take care of all those sinful reactions. So that's what Srila Prabhupada explains. One may think that because he's surrendering unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he will not be able to perform all his other obligations. But the Lord says repeatedly, don't hesitate. Don't consider that because you're giving up all other engagements, there will be some flaw in your life. Don't think like that. I will give you all protection. That is the assurance of Lord Krishna. Okay, and then Srila Prabhupada is quoting two more quotes from the Bhagavatam. Okay, so in this way, that's the purity, that's the greatness of pure devotional service, that if one simply surrenders to Krishna, then one pays off the debts to so many other people of the world. So this is the purity and potency of pure devotional service. So therefore, understanding the greatness of pure devotional service, we need to preach and help everyone take to the process of pure devotional service. Okay, read this lecture of Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ordered that Prithvi, all over the world, as many towns and villages are there, my name will be established there. So we are trying to do that. So his name should be established does not mean that they should remain as Yavanas or Mlechas and simply they should know Lord Chaitanya. No, actually the fact is that everyone should be elevated to the position of Vaishnava, purified Vaishnava.
Yes, so everyone needs to be elevated to the position of Vaishnava. Okay, fine. Any questions on this chapter?
No, Prabhu.
Okay, no questions?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, will be indebted to our Guru Maharaj also, Prabhuji?
What's that?
Will we be indebted to our Guru Maharaj also because he's initiating us and all, Prabhuji?
Is there any doubt about that?
No, Prabhuji.
Srila Prabhupada says one can never pay the debt to the spiritual master. One remains eternally indebted to the spiritual master. The same is told by Prithu Maharaj. After Sanat Kumar gave transcendental knowledge to Prithu Maharaj, he says that for the knowledge that you give, what can I give in return? All what I can give is Vinoda Patram. With my two hands, I can just offer water. That's it. And the other meaning of Vinoda Patram is anyone who thinks that he can pay off the debt to the spiritual master simply becomes a laughing stock, a clown. Because one can actually never repay the debt to the spiritual master. So, Srila Prabhupada says one can try to do so by serving in his mission. So by serving the spiritual master in his mission, one can try. One can never actually repay the debts, but one can try to do so by doing some service. So that's the reason why we eternally remain indebted to Srila Prabhupada as the founder Acharya of ISKCON for saving us from material existence. And the only way we can try to repay the debts is by trying to do some service within ISKCON. Okay, fine. So we'll proceed on to the next chapter. Chapter 6, How to Discharge Devotional Service. Okay, so this chapter is basically describing the angas of sadhana bhakti. So what is the meaning of an anga of bhakti? So Rupa Goswami describes, Atra anga lakshanam ashrita vantaraneka bhedam. Oh, you're not able to see?
No.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. Now?
Yes, Prabhuji.
So Atral Anga Lakshanam Ashrita Vantara Antaraneka Bhedam Kevalam Ebaba Ekam Karmatra Vidbadhi Ekam Bhakti Angam Uchate. In Bhakti, the characteristics of an anga are as follows. The learned define an anga of Bhakti as a complex of devotional actions with internal divisions, or only one action of Bhakti which does not have clearly defined differences within it. So to put it in simple words, an anga of Bhakti is either one action or multiple actions, okay, which are similar. And so a complex of devotional actions or one action of Bhakti constitutes an anga of bhakti. So here in this chapter, Rupa Goswami is describing 64 angas of bhakti, 64 angas of sadhana bhakti. You can see the slide.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes,
64 angas of sadhana bhakti. 20 items of primary importance. 1 to 10 are activities to accept, pravritti. 11 to 20 are activities to avoid, nivritti. And there are 44 additional items of service. 21 to 59 are items of sadhana, and the last 5, 60 to 64, are the 5 most effective items. So we know this famous verse, Sarvapadi Vinirmuktam Tatparatvena Nirmalam Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Ruchate. So bhakti can be performed with the various senses, serving the master of the senses. And so therefore, the angas of bhakti have also been classified in terms of the various senses. So whole body, 11 items, voice, 5 items, taste, 2 items, and so on. So this is based upon the senses involved. Okay, fine. So now read from the book, the first paragraph.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Srila Rupa Goswami states that his elder brother Sanatan Goswami has compiled Hari Bhakti Vilas for the guidance of the Vaishnavas, and therein has mentioned many rules and regulations to be followed by the Vaishnavas. Some of them are very important and prominent, and Srila Rupa Goswami will now mention these very important items for our benefit. The purport of this statement is that Srila Rupa Goswami proposes to mention only basic principles, not details. For example, a basic principle is that one has to accept a spiritual master. Exactly how one follows the instructions of a spiritual master is considered a detail. For example, if one is following the instructions of his spiritual master and that instruction is different from the instructions of another spiritual master, this is called detailed information. But the basic principle of acceptance of a spiritual master is good everywhere, although the details may be different. Srila Rupa Goswami does not wish to enter into details here, but wants to place before us only the principles.
Okay. So this is a very important discussion about principles and details. So what is a principle? A principle is a non-adjustable rule and regulation. Okay, so a non-adjustable rule is called as a principle. And an adjustable rule is called as a detail within that principle. Okay, so principle is something which cannot be adjusted, which cannot be changed, whereas a detail is something which can be adjusted and changed. That is a basic definition of what's a principle and what's a detail. So now here Rupa Goswami is giving these 64 angas of bhakti. What are they? They are all principles. Please remember this point. The 64 angas of bhakti are all principles. I should Prabhupada writes here. Srila Rupa Goswami does not wish to enter into details here, but wants to place before us only the principles. So the 64 angas of bhakti are non-adjustable principles. They cannot be changed. So Srila Prabhupada is giving an example of what's a principle and what's a detail. So just like the first principle that Rupa Goswami is giving, Adau Guru Padashraya, accepting the shelter of a bona fide spiritual master is a principle. Following his instructions is also a principle. But then, based upon time, place, circumstances, and candidates, a certain spiritual master may give a certain instruction to one disciple and may give another instruction to another disciple. So that's a detail. So accepting a spiritual master is a principle. It's universally applicable. So when you talk of principle, principle means it is universally applicable and is trans-contextual. That means it is not restricted to certain context or certain time, place, circumstances. So therefore, it is universally applicable and trans-contextual. That's a principle. So the principle of accepting a bona fide spiritual master always applies. Srila Prabhupada often quoted from the Mundaka Upanishad. Tad vijnanatam sa gurum eva bikachet. Eva bikachet means it is compulsory. If one wants to get Vigyan, tad Vijnanartham, if one wants to get Vigyan, realized knowledge, then it is compulsory that one accept a bona fide spiritual master. So therefore it's a principle. But what's a detail within that is, one spiritual master may give a certain instruction to one disciple, different instruction to another disciple. That's a detail. But the principle of accepting the bona fide spiritual master and following his instructions always remains. Is this point clear as to what's a principle and what's a detail?
Yes.
Prabhuji.
Yes,
Yes,
Prabhuji.
yes,
Okay.
yes, Prabhuji.
So now we find that Srila Prabhupada in his preaching, when he went to the West, he made some adjustments in details without changing the principles. Can you give some examples? What adjustments did Srila Prabhupada make in details without changing principles?
Chanting 64 rounds. Prabhu.
Okay, so what he did?
He made it 16 rounds due to.
Okay, fine. So Srila Prabhupada, he made yes, the chant. So the chanting of the holy names is a principle, as we'll see. The chanting the holy names is principle. But the number of rounds may be a detail. So it's said that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Thakur had different standards for different disciples based upon the ashram and so on. But Srila Prabhupada made it a general standard rule for everyone, minimum 16 rounds and nothing less. So okay, that's an adjustment which he did. Any other adjustments for Srila Prabhupada? Any other adjustments that Srila Prabhupada did in his preaching in the West?
Prabhuji, he initiated a lot of disciples just based on their enthusiasm. Also, we hear about it. Ji.
What do you mean?
Like he had confidence. So even though they were new to the movement, because they just dedicated their whole life, and he was so impressed, and he sort of took them under his wings and gave them shelter, and
So what's the adjustment?
he obliged. I don't know, in olden traditional ways, it would have been probably a long drawn wait, or a lot of things needed to be checked.
Okay, fine. So that was, of course, maybe the first batch of devotees he initiated. He was a little bit lenient. But then later on, subsequently, of course, things became tight. Srila Prabhupada made things strict eventually. Maybe just the first one or two batches, Srila Prabhupada was a bit lenient.
Okay.
But in fact, Srila Prabhupada never compromised. Srila Prabhupada said that, yes, following the four regulated principles, chanting 16 rounds, that's a must.
Yes, Prabhu.
So unlike so many other so-called spiritual gurus, Srila Prabhupada was very strict. And in fact, Srila Prabhupada himself said that I never compromised. If I would have compromised, there would have been many more followers and disciples. So to actually establish these four principles in the Western world was quite revolutionary. So it's not that Srila Prabhupada was in any way lenient. Any other adjustments?
Yes, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna. So in the beginning, Srila Prabhupada went to many places without any reservations to spread the movement. For example, he went to this big Western music, culture, whatever the place.
Mantra rock dance.
Yes.
In San Francisco.
Yes, Prabhuji. So to spread the movement, he didn't have any reservations. He went to any place and utilize that.
Okay, that was one. Okay, that was one event Srila Prabhupada went.
Yes.
But what are some other significant adjustments Srila Prabhupada made?
Adjustments in deity worship, Prabhuji?
What adjustments?
Allowing women also to do deity worship.
Okay, yes, that's one adjustment. Yes, allowing women also to do deity worship on the altar. So that's one adjustment which Srila Prabhupada brought about, especially in the Western world, because Srila Prabhupada gave them shelter and then Srila Prabhupada engaged them in all types of services. Okay, that's one adjustment. Yes, that's correct. What else? So the principle is deity worship. So who performs it, that's a detail. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada made that adjustment.
Similarly, for other services as well, like book distribution and so as well, right? So for females, so those were allowed.
Okay, so yes, he engaged ladies in all types of services. That's correct.
He gave Brahman initiative to many devotees, like who are not that much qualified. Still, he gave for the name of service.
No, he gave Brahman initiation to those who were qualified.
The morning prayers, Prabhu Govindam Adipurusham, was sung by Matajis, and many disciples didn't like it, but still Srila Prabhupada continued the tradition.
Okay. The Govindam Adipurusham was something which he introduced during the Darshanarti, and then yes, some devotees had objection. Prabhupada said, no, it's a symphony. It's a symphony. There are so many voices, so many instruments. He said it's a symphony, so no problem. Okay, fine. What else?
He allowed him to preach based on just based on books. He allowed every to preach based on his.
Your voice is breaking.
So Prabhuji, he allowed everybody to preach based on his books. To preach, probably there is
okay,
a
allowed everyone to
that one
preach.
has
Okay,
to
that's
have, but
fine.
which we don't see in any other parampara, Prabhuji.
Okay, so okay, fine. So especially book distribution, mass book distribution was definitely quite a unique way of preaching that Srila Prabhupada introduced on the instruction of the spiritual master. So yes, ISKCON definitely became the world's biggest distributor of religious books. Yes, that's definitely true.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, that he started Rath Yatra.
Yeah.
In the Western cities.
Yes, all over the world. All over the world.
Yes.
Jagannath Rath Yatras. Yes, so previously it was restricted only to basically Jagannath Puri in India. So, but then Srila Prabhupada, he introduced Rath Yatras all over the world. Yes.
He allowed Prashadam to be sold in restaurants like Govinda's.
No, that's not distribute sold. That is always.
India, like people are accustomed to get free prasad, but he allowed people to take money for